Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a question that sounds really simple on the surface, but it's not. The question is, who actually owns America? Now, we tend to think of history as this neat collection of deeds, treaties, and laws, but what if that's just the surface level? What if there are other blueprints, other contracts, hidden just out of sight? And this quote right here, this is really going to be our guide for today. It comes from a source that pretty much challenges everything we think we know. It's an invitation to look past that official story, the crust, and to start digging for a deeper, way more complex truth about who really holds the title to the land. So let's start with that crust. This is the history we all learn in school, right? It's a story of settlement, of laws, of big agreements that are all documented and filed away somewhere. This is the official blueprint. Now, this official history, it lays out a pretty orderly process. You see this legal framework being built starting way back in 1621 with French Protestants petitioning for land. Fast forward a few decades to 1658, and Virginia is actually passing laws to get more settlers to come over. And by 1700, you have ships like the Peter and Anthony showing up, making the whole process of becoming American really formal. And you can see right here, this is the human side of that official record. These weren't just numbers on a page, they were actual people with names. Jean Bossard and his family, Suzanne Soblet and her kids. Every single name on this passenger list represents a legal entry, another documented piece of this ownership puzzle, all recorded for history. So, while all these European settlers were arriving under colonial law, there was this other huge legal process happening at the exact same time: the formal transfer of land from its original inhabitants to the United States, all done through official treaties. Take a look at this number. $2,700. That's the total value in cash and stuff that the Great and Little Osage nations got in a treaty back in 1808. And in exchange for that, the United States got title to a gigantic chunk of territory, basically most of modern-day Missouri and Arkansas. It's another example of an official, on-the-books transfer of ownership. Okay, so we have this very clear, documented history of deeds and treaties. Everything seems to be accounted for. But is that really the whole story? Were there other systems, other sets of rules about ownership, operating in the shadows, away from the public eye? And that question brings us to our second layer. Now we're looking at private societies that had their own internal laws, their own traditions. These groups had rules for conduct and loyalty that were totally separate from the government's laws. And a perfect example of this is Freemasonry. And this is where the difference becomes really, really clear. On one hand, you've got public law that applies to everybody. But then, for members, Masonic law was just as real, just as binding. It had its own version of a constitution, the ancient landmarks, and its own legal rulings. It was basically a parallel system of rules, only understood by the people on the inside. And this one word, Cowan, it kind of says it all, doesn't it? It's a term from inside the Masonic tradition, and it just means outsider, someone who isn't in on the secrets. It draws a really clear line in the sand. There are those who are in the club and get the rules, and then there's, well, everyone else. So we have the public laws, we have the rules of private societies, but one revisionist history source, called Pandora's Box, asks an even more mind-bending question. What if both of those systems are just a distraction? What if there's a third layer of control, one that's even more hidden? And this is where we finally get to the meat of the pie. This third layer brings in a theory that the real ownership of America isn't held by people, or even the government, but that it's all been secretly consolidated under corporate control through hidden contracts. Now, according to this source, the railroads weren't just about trains and tracks. They were supposedly the tool for a gigantic, secret transfer of land control. The claim is that huge parts of the country were put under 99-year leases, which would basically make a corporation the landlord of America. And the first big one, allegedly, was the Southern Railway Company. And the theory just gets bigger from there. It claims this hidden ownership structure includes some of America's most famous companies, names you see every day, like General Motors, Exxon, Quaker Oats. This source alleges they're all part of one single dynastic monopoly. If you believe this view, then irregular property deeds are just for show, hiding a much deeper corporate reality. Okay. Let's just take one final step back. We've looked at official deeds, secret societies, and wild theories about corporate contracts. But all of these ideas, all these layers, they're all built on a shared map of history, of who was here first and what they were called. But what if that map,
What if the very foundation itself is wrong?
Our final layer now questions the most basic things we assume about American history. It challenges the very words we use to describe the continent's original people, suggesting that even our official terminology might be part of the illusion.
So this final point is a fundamental challenge to our very language. The official, widely accepted term is Native American, but some revisionist sources claim this is a modern label, even calling it a conquest tag. They argue that the original inhabitants were actually known as Moors or Moors. Now, if someone were to accept that idea, it would force them to rethink pretty much every treaty and every historical story we have.
Wow. So we've gone on a journey from official deeds to secret societies, from claims of corporate leases, all the way to a radical new look at identity itself. Each layer just makes the one before it more complicated, and it leaves us with this huge, unsettling question. When history can be written from so many different blueprints, what does it even mean to own a nation? And who really holds the deed to America?